X-Men Blue Origins came out. A lot of people are talking about it, and I thought this is something I got to look into for myself. So I read it, and I have opinions that I just need to make a video on. I'm Haussmann Comics. Thank you for being here while we talk about this. So X-Men Blue Origins has just exploded on the internet. Everyone has opinions. They've changed the origin of Nightcrawler somewhat. It's not really his origin, it's more his birth, and now Mystique is the father. And we will get to that in a second, because with something like this, obviously I want to dig into and read all of Nightcrawler's other origins first. So right away, we have Giant X-Men number 1. Nightcrawler shows up. He's being chased by a mob, and Xavier shows up and stops everybody in their tracks with his mind and brings Kurt into the X-Men. I think everybody knows that story. The first time that story was touched upon and revisited with his birth as well was X-Men Annual in 1980, and this one showed for the first time Kurt as a baby was brought in by Margali, this gypsy woman who raised him with her other children. And that's the first time we see that Kurt actually had to kill his brother because his brother was being evil, his adopted brother, and that's when Xavier's he was running from the mob because he killed his brother, and he's afraid to go home to Margali, his mother, and his sister because they thought he killed Stefan. So once again, that, like I said, that's his origin. That was what it was established in the 80s. But there it was shown that, oh, he was a baby and he was found by Margali and brought in and raised. And then in Uncanny X-Men number 182, I believe, the second part of Days of Future Past, that's the first time that Nightcrawler meets Mystique, and he's like, what? You look like me, even though they're just blue. Like, there's plenty of other blue people and they're not all related, but they're blue, and I guess they must have had similar features. And Chris Claremont was the writer, and he was like, yeah, Mystique is definitely something to do with Nightcrawler, definitely apparent. He established that a long time ago in his head. It was not established in the comics, but this was the first time they met, and Nightcrawler's like, why do you look like me? And Mystique just says, go ask Margali, ask your mother, and she'll tell you who I am. She'll tell you what the deal is. And Nightcrawler never really followed up on that. He never did. So, but that was where it was laid, and for years everybody was like, oh, what's the connection? You know, it was heavily speculated, very deeply, like Mystique was Nightcrawler's mother. Everybody just kind of knew that and took it for granted. Chris Claremont had actually intended for Nightmare. He's a Doctor Strange villain, demon, like nightmare creature from the nightmare realm. He'd always intended for Nightmare to be Nightcrawler's father because they both have pointy ears or whatnot. And the writer from Doctor Strange at the time was like, no, that's like a major villain in my book, and you're not just bringing him over to the X-Men universe and tying him to your title. So no. And then that guy, can't remember his name, I'll put it right here, became the editor for X-Men Comics, and he's like, I just kept denying Chris Claremont use of Nightmare until he stopped wanting to do it. But then interestingly enough, I found articles and interviews like as far back as the 80s and 90s where Chris Claremont was like, I wanted Destiny to be Nightcrawler's mother and Mystique to be Nightcrawler's father. Now that is the controversy that everyone is all not up in arms, but this is what's got everybody talking about X-Men Origins Blue or X-Men Blue Origins and how Mystique is Nightcrawler's father. But that was Chris Claremont's original plan. But Marvel was kind of like, ooh, that's a bit much, I think. Not sure why it didn't happen. But it was in 1994 they finally did go fully in and explain the parentage. I believe it was Scott Lobdell in X-Men Unlimited number 4 went into Nightcrawler's origins there, and because Graydon Creed is a whole other character that is the son of Mystique and Sabretooth, and he's a human, and he started the Friends of Humanity and was a very anti-mutant group, and he found out Mystique was his mother, and he's like, oh, and he paid some guy to investigate it to confirm if Mystique is his mother, and the guy comes back like, oh yeah, no, Mystique's your mother, but I'm more interested in your brother. And he's like, what? Yeah, what? I have to find out about this. So he does, and it's Kurt Wagner, the Nightcrawler, is Graydon Creed's brother. So it's like, what? Which everybody speculated anyway. But Nightcrawler and Rogue go and they are talking to Mystique, and they're like, what is the deal here? And this is when we finally get the story, where Mystique was married to Baron Wagner in Germany 20 years ago, which they always draw like really old Germany, but that's unrelated. But she's like, yep, I had this baby, and God damn it, giving birth to you, and I saw your blue skin, and the doctor was like, this baby's blue, that's weird. But when your skin touched mine, like, fuck, I slipped. And I showed a bit of my blue, and they all chased me down like I was a demon. So she runs, she takes the baby and she runs, and she's trying to, save herself. Not so much the baby, as it would turn out. She gets away from everybody and gets to the edge of a cliff, but she's like, there's nowhere to run, and people are closing in on her, and she's like, for crying out loud. So she shapeshifts into one of the townspeople and was like, yeah, I caught a lady here, and I threw her over the cliff into the river. She's dead. She's blue and dead. And they're all like, okay, cool, throw the baby too. And she's like, yeah, why not? So she's like, and this is peak evil Mystique. This is like 1994, before we decided all our heroes were really good when they became popular in movies and tried to soften them up, right? So they're like, yeah. And Mystique is like, I picked you up, little baby Nightcrawler, Kurt, and I didn't even hesitate. I didn't think about you or your well-being for a second. I thought, it's me or him, and, I'm me. And she picked him up and just tossed him off a cliff. Like, she threw him into the river, baby Nightcrawler, where, of course, he would survive and be caught and raised by Margali. Not caught. She just found him in the river, I assume. So then from there, we go on, and we got the the Draco. In Uncanny X-Men 400-something, Chuck Austin. The less we can talk about the Draco, the better, but we have to. And it gives us a whole issue just telling that story of Mystique, and Mystique being married to Baron Wagner, Christian Wagner. And Azazel comes, this guy. He's like, oh, I'm the president of some other island or whatever, but he actually is a demon, but he's actually not a demon. He's like, I'm Satan, I'm Beelzebub, I am the devil. And they're like, no, you're not. And it's actually, he was an ancient mutant from biblical times, but he's red and he can teleport, and he's like just banging all over the world, hoping to get enough children that he can control genetically, like with mental stuff. And he wants to get a bunch of teleporters that can open a portal for him to come to the Earth and take it over. And actually, he used to go back and forth with Margali. Somebody has to open the portal from the other end. So Margali, Nightcrawler's mother, would open the portal. And it's like revealed he bangs Mystique and knocks her up. And is Nightcrawler's father. Finally, at long last, we learn who Nightcrawler's father is. And it's Azazel, this demon man. And he, like, runs away from Mystique. He's like, nah, whatever. We're just banging and making babies. Like, I gotta go around the world and make a bunch of babies. So, you know, have a good time with your emotions. And she was like, but I love you. And he's like, whatever. And it's revealed that he was the one, since he was working with Margali, and he knew for some reason Mystique was going to abandon the baby and throw him over a river. And this one, we see it again. We see Mystique again throwing the baby over the waterfall, but it bamps away, and it's Azazel teleports in, catches the baby, and then brings it to Margali to raise. Still works. Everything still fits. The origin all still lines up. And then we get Nightcrawler had his own series, and that didn't really do anything but change the events with Stefan. Same with, there was a Uncanny Origins, which actually changed some events again. It was just an issue called Uncanny Origins in the 90s. Anyway, that still just has a baby washing up in the river. Another X-Men Origins Nightcrawler story that also had a baby in the river, and he was, Margali was telling him the story about how wonderful and loved his mother was, and how everybody in the world in the countryside wanted this baby. They all fought for the right to be able to raise the baby, and Margali was chosen. And Nightcrawler is even like, yeah, I know these are lies, but I like to hear the story anyway. Because the origin has been told to him that he was found like beside his dead mother and stuff like that, but that was just something Margali told him. So I mean, that's still all acceptable, right? But like these other origins that I've talked about here with her throwing him off, that's not, well, one of them was her retelling, I guess. But the other one was like a straight up flashback. Nobody was retelling the story. It's like, this is just a comic book set in this time. This is what happened. This is definitive. The Azazel thing, for better or for worse, which I'm fine with. Just Chuck Austin and other things in the Draco were weird, but that was the origin. Like I said, even Azazel says, like, our genetic ties allowed me to control you. And Abyss, who is like Nightcrawler's brother now, was like, I feel this connection. We're obviously brothers, you know? So that implies the genetic thing. So then, now, that brings us up to X-Men Blue Origins, where Mystique is the father. Now, even she's like, yeah, you know, so when she was Countess Wagner, or whatever, Baron Wagner's wife, she brought Destiny on to work in the maid staff. And this is the first, we've seen this scene a few times. This is the first time we've seen the maid, and it being Destiny or Irene. So that's just interesting. Like, Destiny and Mystique being lovers is no new thing. They've been hinted at and whatnot for a long time. It's been established. So that's there. So yeah, Mystique, it makes sense. Mystique would, you know, start this new life and get this money situation set up, and obviously she would bring in Irene, her love, right? It's just like I said, we've never seen it before. Anyway, the whole thing comes, and Azazel comes, and then everything, but then Irene is like, I want to start a family, I want to have a baby with you, and it's like, okay, and Mystique alters herself to become a man, which I'm actually fine with. It's been explained, like, for years how powerful she is at manipulating her own thing, and she can restructure her own DNA, basically. She can control her own self at the atomic level. So obviously, yeah, she can make a dude, she can make sperm. People on the internet and stuff, I've seen it said that she took the form of Azazel, but that's never explicitly said anywhere in the comics. She kind of says, yeah, like, obviously I could use people I've touched and have contact with as a basis. She talks about Christian Wagner, she talks about Azazel, she talks about all the other things. And that would explain why Azazel feels he has a genetic connection, was if Mystique used her own genetics, but then that wouldn't explain why Nightcrawler has these connections to Mystique. Like, if she used somebody else's DNA to rewrite her own DNA and become that, then is she even the father? That's the whole thing I have an issue with. I don't even have an issue with, like, but yeah, Mystique being a man, like, that's fine. She's a shapeshifter. She can be anything she wants. And that's, a lot of people are like, oh, it's woke and stuff. It's not. It's not woke. There's nothing actually in here about transgender identity, which actually I think could have been a good opportunity, although maybe a shapeshifter is a bit of a slap in the face to that community, someone who can walk both lines and go back and forth freely. Like, so, you know, maybe that's a subject you don't want to touch upon, but they didn't at all. It's nothing woke. It's just, if Mystique had the ability to impregnate her lady lover and make a family, why wouldn't she take that opportunity? So they do, and it all still goes the same way. Mystique has to give up the baby, but this time she runs because everybody's like, oh, she's a mutant, and they're gonna take her. And Irene's like, take the baby and go, and she takes the baby, and then she lays him down in the woods, and then she goes back to help Destiny, and then when she comes back, the baby's gone from the woods, and then it's like, okay, but like, we've definitively seen her throw the baby over the waterfalls and stuff like that. And they do go to Professor Xavier and have the whole thing erased from their minds because they don't want to live with the pain anymore. Destiny gets the whole thing wiped, and Mystique's like, no, I want to remember that I had this baby. And even that, like, the flashback of the birthing scene is different, and people, that's a whole other thing. People are like, oh, you can't have a baby on your knees, but yeah, you can. It's normal. It's fine. But it's just the fact that we've already seen the scene play out in a different way is what is different. Anyway, yeah, more or less, I'm fine with it. It's the little inconsistencies that I didn't like. But like I said, Azazel is like, straight up, you are my son, so I guess they kind of explain that away. And then, like, yeah, Xavier wipes Mystique's mind, but he's like, hey, like, to take it all out, that's fine. I can do that. To take most of it out and leave some of it, like, would maybe mess up your mind a little and give you some broken, fractured, crazy memories. So that's them trying to explain away why she remembered things differently. But as I said, like, we've seen them differently. But anyway, so the real problem also comes 5 years later. She comes across Irene, and Irene is there in a park, and she's like, hey, listen, like, and she explains it very well. She's like, listen, I had the visions, because that's Destiny's power. She sees visions of the future. She's like, I had the visions, and honestly, it had to play out this way. Azazel was going to, like, be obsessed with taking over the world, and he was going to succeed unless this baby, Nightcrawler, went on and became an X-Man and stopped him from doing that. Like, it had to happen this way, lest a demon take over the world. And Mystique's like, yeah, that sucks, but whatever. She accepts it. But anyway, they're in the park, and that's the big issue I have, because she's like, oh, this kid here is named Anne-Marie, and it's Rogue, because Mystique and Destiny raised Rogue as their adopted daughter. It's like, she's been on her own for a week, and people are noticing, like, drug peddlers and sex trade people, they're going to come get her unless we do something in a few minutes. And then it kind of shows, like, that's where they got Rogue, and they raised her as a loving family. But then if you look back at Rogue's origin, which was actually told in X-Men Unlimited #4, so we should have seen it before. Like, if somebody read that in preparation for writing this, they would have seen that. And Rogue, when she's first approached by Mystique, like, she's sitting there with a shotgun, and her name is Rogue, whereas this time she's just a little girl in the park named Anne-Marie. So little differences like that. And also, if you're wondering why Kurt is in a Spider-Man costume, it's like a whole other story, but he's basically, mutants aren't allowed on Earth anymore, and Xavier put out an order for mutants to get off of Earth, and that mental order is actually what broke Mystique's mind to help her remember all this stuff, and he's just fighting crime as a Spider-Man. Holy crap, I gotta go. Like and subscribe.